Hey, Paul, welcome to the show. It was way getting started. Tell us about yourself.
Hey, Brian, really excited to be here today. Well, today I'm, a CEO of a B2B digital agency right outside of Dallas in a suburb called Carrollton. And what we do is basically generate leads for B2B companies using digital marketing and then nurture those leads until they're what we call sales ready, and then pass them on to very capable sales folks like those that like to listen to your show and let them get the deals across the finish line. But my background goes way back to dinosaur times. Kind of
Yeah.
back in, well, at least 1990. I don't know if the dinosaurs were
Oh,
around.
they were there then.
Yeah, well, a few of them might have been around, but certainly back then, my focus was in technology sales. In fact, that's where I cut my teeth as a technology sales guy, working for what we called back then third-party technology companies. So my competitor was the 800-pound gorilla back then, known as IBM. And I know you know something about IBM, Brian. You had a little bit of a stint there, it looks like,
A little bit,
on
yeah.
your resume, right? So,
Yeah.
I had the fun job back in the 90s. One of the great things about being in technology sales back then is you got some of the best sales training that was around. And so certainly had some great sales training. But it was an interesting job because I was to go sell to the CIOs of the world that had just purchased an IBM mainframe and then convince them that they needed to buy all the things that attach to that mainframe, like storage and tape drives and CRTs. There weren't PCs back then, believe it or not, really dinosaur times, and convince them that they needed to buy those peripheral devices, is what we called them, from my company and not from IBM. And so that was an interesting world to live in for sure.
Was that hard?
You know,
Because
it was a challenge because they had a saying, and I'm sure everybody that's listening, or hopefully many of them have, I know you've heard this saying, Brian, and that is, you never got fired for buying IBM, right? And so it was hard in that all of my customers back then had already made that IBM decision. They had IBM equipment that we were going to try to sell things that attached to. And so that was kind of the soup du jour, the 800-pound gorilla in the room. But I learned some really valuable lessons back then about selling, and that is ultimately relationship wins. I mean, it's really great when you work for IBM and you've got this installed account that has your equipment, but to a certain degree, that was almost to the sales rep's detriment because I had to go work harder. I had to really learn and build relationships with their customers, and through that relationship and really trying to understand the problems that they were trying to solve. That was the only way I could win. That really kind of became my superpower against the IBM rep. Was I would get to know my customers really, really well, and I would learn the problems they were trying to solve, and not necessarily the problems that they were trying to solve for their business, although they were always intertwined with what I'm about to say, but really what were they trying to accomplish? This human being that I was selling to was trying to do something in their life. They were trying to make their life better, climb a ladder, whatever the case may be. Part of that was accomplishing business and overcoming business problems. And so I really focused my energies there.
and I think a lot of reps kind of put that, what I believe is a false belief, in the way of their sale. Because no matter what account you go in, they've already bought something.
Right.
And your stuff has to connect to it, build on
Right.
top of it,
That's right.
do something with it.
Right. And the thing that has always astonished me, especially back in the technology sales days, is everybody wanted to come in and lead with speeds and feeds. Oh, my equipment's faster, my equipment's cheaper, my equipment's more reliable, whatever the case may be. And the reality is customers really don't care that much about how fast your equipment's going to run, or you name it, whatever the features of your products are today, until they know that you actually care about solving a problem that they have and really what it's going to take. Do you have what it takes to help them get their business problem across the finish line?
Yeah. And I think sales reps have to look at that totality. What is the real thing?
Yeah, what is that customer really trying to accomplish? And the meeting and what got you there may not always be the ultimate thing that they're trying to accomplish. That might be the shiny trinket that got you in the door, but ultimately what's behind that that they're trying to accomplish for themselves and for their businesses.
And why'd you get out of sales or selling for other people?
You know, it's interesting, Brian. So I started out in 1990, and that was a great decade to be in technology sales. So, yeah, absolutely, right. And so in 98, I found myself kind of sitting on top of the pinnacle for technology sales. I worked for a very large storage company and I was basically at their top level, which was called a national account executive. I had one client, and that was SBC Communications, which is now known as AT&T. Of course, we all know that. And I had a $21 million a year quota. And I enjoyed what I was doing, and I built a great relationship with SBC over the years. But in many ways, Brian, my job had almost become like an accounting job. I would get my $21 million quota. I had such good relationships with my customer that I would actually share with them my quota every year. I'd go and meet with them and say, well, I got my quota today, $21 million. And they'd look at me and go, Paul, man, we love the company that you work for, and we love you, but there is no way we're going to buy $21 million from you this year. And so my job was really to go find places where they had problems. And a lot of times, Brian, that meant uncovering problems. One of the best lessons I ever learned goes all the way back to my sales training. I had a great VP of sales, and he taught me two things that I've held very close to my heart all these years. One is, hey, and he said this the very first day. He said, if you want to not worry about your quota for the rest of your life, who wants to not worry about your quota for the rest of your life? And of course, we all raised our hands. We're 20-something, wet behind the ears sales reps. And he says, here's the secret. Forget about your quota. Become a problem solver. Solve as many problems as you can, and forget about who you're solving them for. Just look at life through the lenses of how can you help and how can you solve problems, and you'll never have to worry about your commission ever again. Well, I took that to heart, and I found that to be so incredibly true, so that when I meet people for the first time, I'm not trying to sell them something at all, even though ultimately I may help them win by selling some of my products or services. My ultimate goal is to help be a problem solver, help them solve a problem. The other thing that he taught me, which has been incredibly valuable to me and is right in line with what you do for a living, Brian, he said, hone your craft. He says, everybody in this room is a craftsman. Just like, a blacksmith, just like an artist, you are a craftsman. And so it is your responsibility throughout your career to hone your craft. And so, I look at what you do, Brian, and I have so much respect for that, because even in today's world, look at how much sales has changed since the 90s. And I know you were around back in the 90s as well. So, we didn't have the internet, right? Yeah. So, it was interesting.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, exactly. In a way, selling in the 90s, you might think, gosh, that must have been hard because, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have access to information like you do today. But in many ways, I found that it was easy, in that a sales rep, especially in technology or the complex sale, as you like to call it, we were the gatekeepers of knowledge. If somebody had to figure out how to solve something, they couldn't go let their fingers do the walking on Google, right? They had to call somebody and say, hey, my backups aren't running fast enough, and I got to figure out a way to get them to run faster. What would you do, right? And so we were the gatekeepers of knowledge. Today's sales reps have a different challenge, in that buyers have ubiquitous access to information. They're self-educating, and they're not going to sales reps to gain that knowledge. So it's much more of a relational situation today, in my mind, than it was back then.
Right. Because I remember in the 90s, briefing people, you could sell a briefing. You could call up a CIO and you go, sure, look, I don't know what stage you're in, but I wanted to give you an update on what's going on. And they'd be like, sure.
Oh yeah. And they'd bring all their staff in, sometimes you'd bring lunch over, and it was so easy to get a meeting.
Lunch and learns, they would have meetings. And as long as you weren't a jerk and pitching, that it was of value, it was like a live webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, it's those same traits at work in today's world, right? Yeah. It's not bringing your bag of tricks to the table. It's really, coming to the table really anxious and desirous to learn what they're trying to accomplish, and then get on their side of the desk and really help them accomplish it. The sales reps that are winning today are the reps that really get that. You know, the customer that buys from a sales rep today doesn't see that person as a rep with a quota. They see them as an advisor that's helping them accomplish what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, you know, they're trying to buy into the high velocity sale, but that only works if you're in a high velocity buy market.
Right.
When you're in the tornado.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, because you sold mostly storage. Is that?
Yeah. So back in the 90s, it was anything that would attach to a mainframe. So storage was a big part of it. You know, believe it or not, tape drives that you would back up data on. I don't know that. I bet many of your listeners don't even know what a tape drive is, but
well, they see them in the movies.
That's right. That's right. Hey, my very first sale I ever made was a 3.4 gigabyte disk subsystem. Yeah. Any guesses of what a 3.4 gigs disk subsystem, something you can pick up for like $10 today, cost in the 90s?
I have no idea.
$64,000.
Yeah.
I know the world has changed a lot, hasn't it?
It is crazy. I just got a new iMac, and they allow you to open the back and you can upgrade the memory yourself. And
yeah, that's crazy.
I got 128 meg for $500.
Yeah.
Right.
It's crazy.
And I remember, you know, early 90s, I was at Tech and we would change a 32 meg board, which was bigger than the iMac.
Yeah, right.
You would pull it out. And they were so expensive, we couldn't keep them local. They'd have to fly them out.
Oh, yeah.
And they buy a first class seat for them. And they, you know.
the world has changed. That's for sure. But, you know, fundamentals of selling, you know, haven't changed that much when it comes to the way that you interact.
You know, people think, yeah, the technology has certainly changed. Even organizations have changed. Buying processes a little bit different. But human beings haven't changed that fast.
No.
You know, we've only had smartphones for what, a decade, but we've been around for like 200,000 years in groups.
Right. Yeah. I love you had one of your walk around videos that was recent, maybe the last couple of weeks, and you talk about mammal to mammal selling, right? And at the end of the day, you know, there's only really three things that a mammal's going to do when you encounter them. And you talked about two, which is fight or flee. And really the sales rep's job is the third thing, and that is to communicate to that mammal, hey, I'm on your tribe. We're on the same team. We're gonna fight together. And in that early stage of developing relationships, you know, that's your goal in stage one, is communicating to that other mammal, hey, I'm on your team. We're on the same team. We're gonna fight the alligators or whoever comes over that mountain to attack us together. We're in this together.
And that's it. And all the marketers are marketing to the prefrontal cortex, which could care less, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because 90% of it's our subconscious. It's our mammal brain.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're sitting there thinking about how am I going to survive? How am I going to thrive? You know, I need you to tell me how you're going to help me make it through this day and not get attacked or killed or eaten. Right.
Yes. Where's my dinner? Where's my next nap?
Right. Exactly.
And how do I stay dry tonight?
Yeah. And that's why, you know, even in what we do today, you know, we feel like marketing's job so much is, you know, giving the buyer the information that they need to get into that logical part of their brain so that at least they're informed, because it always kind of starts with, I have a problem. How can I solve this problem? I think marketing does a good job of giving the words to a potential buyer that help them understand, hey, this is a company that's qualified and has some perspective on how to solve my problem. And that's important. But ultimately, it has to get handed off to a sales rep when it's time for, you know, I get this company's qualified to help me, but do they actually care about helping me? And only a salesperson or a mammal is going to be able to communicate that. A marketing department's never going to be able to communicate that.
They can't. Yeah. Because the companies, especially in B2B, the list of things that they can spend their money on is infinite.
Yeah, right.
But they only have enough time. They have more time or more money than they have time.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And in a way, you know, you feel like ubiquitous access to information has given them more efficiency. And, we get into that efficiency versus effectiveness, right? But does it really make them that much more effective?
No.
I don't know that it does. And that really is the value that I think a sales rep brings to the table is, ultimately it's kind of like the Chinese menu. You go to the restaurant, a Chinese menu, and like, I have no idea what I'm going to eat because there's 500 things on this menu for me to pick. Well, that sales rep is like that awesome waiter that can come along and say, well, hey, these are the things that are really going to be right. You're going to love this, right? And that's something that, the internet can't really provide, that a human is going to help them once they've established that trust and that they really care about helping them.
And that is a good analogy because, a good waiter or waitress will ask some questions. It's like, what do you like, seafood or meat? Oh, no, I'm vegetarian. Well, I'm not a vegetarian, but when they come in here, they really like this because of this and this. Have you ever tried anything like that?
Yeah, that's a great point because, a lot of sales reps will play that waiter and go, have you tried our steak?
The lobster?
And you're like, I don't eat meat. I wish you'd ask me that first,
Well, then we have a porterhouse.
Exactly. Because I'm getting paid extra to sell those porterhouses tonight,
Yeah. And I think too often we just think it's budget. And it's like, budget is like, I'm busy. It has no meaning to anybody.
At the end of the day, businesses are going to spend money to to overcome problems, right? I mean, there is budget. It's just finite, right? And so as a sales rep, you're competing against all the other, not just sales reps that are trying to win the business, but every other sales rep in every other department that is competing for that finite budget. Because, when buyers buy, there's really kind of three things that need to happen. One is they need to have a problem to solve, right? You're never going to sell anything unless that customer has a problem. And sometimes your job as a sales rep is to help them see the problem because sometimes they can't even see it, right? But number two, and often I see sales reps forget this part, is understanding that the status quo is always easier than change. Change is always hard. So yes, I understand there's a problem, but I don't know if I want to change. And so you've got to help them understand that there's probably more pain in status quo than the pain of change to solve your problem. And then the third thing is they really need to know that, you're qualified. You're the one that's going to help me solve that problem. And it's the sales rep that can accomplish those three things that is going to get their piece of that budget. And that might be budget that's going to the accounting department, and you're in technology. Ultimately, it's who they believe is going to get them across the finish line the best.
Yeah. And I think a great example is like when Amazon was looking for the next headquarters. Everybody was throwing tax credits at them.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And it was like, and I was sitting down, I go, he's the richest man in the world. Budget is not the issue.
Right.
Where does he want to hang out?
Yeah.
He wants to hang out in New York City because he's getting divorced.
Yeah.
And he just spent $60 million on a penthouse there. He's going to pick New York. And he just spent, $5 million on a house in DC. And he just bought the Washington Post. So probably the DC area is next.
Right.
And everybody should have been selling how great it is to live in my city and it's close to an airport. Don't go giving away tax credits that you're not going to get anything for.
Yeah, I know it. They just were focused on the wrong things.
Yeah. And then New York screws it up. And yet, no matter how badly they screwed it up, they still do work there. Right. They're still hiring people as fast as they can.
I thought that was one of the most brilliant things ever, though, to come out and say, we're going to pick a new headquarters. And, I live in Dallas, so we thought for sure they were going to pick
Every city did, right? Our city's best.
Yeah, exactly.
But you got to understand who's making the decision.
Right. Ultimately, it's a person.
You got a 55-year-old, newly single, wealthiest man in the world.
Right.
Where does he want to hang?
Exactly. And it just goes back to, yes, there are issues and challenges and things that I need to accomplish a goal, but there's a human being that you're selling to. And that goes back to what I was saying about competing with IBM. I mean, I was forced to, it was one of the best lessons I ever learned, to really get to know my customer and to get to know them better than the IBM rep did. And quite frankly, and no knock on IBM, it was easier because when you have the IBM moniker and that's on your business card, you don't feel the need, like, I don't really need to get to know you because, hey, you never got fired for buying from me, right? But I had to go be scrappy and find a way to make my quota. And the only way I could do that was really getting to know my customer and understanding, you know, hey, do you want to live in New York? Do you want to live in Washington, D.C.?
Right.
How can I help you accomplish that, right?
Yeah. And that's it. You have to understand the other person and their whole motives, not
Right.
just cost.
Right. Absolutely.
Now, how'd you get into the dark side of marketing?
Well, you know,
Did
so
something go wrong? Ayahuasca or?
you know, it's interesting, Brian. So I was in '98. You know, as kind of fat, dumb, and happy, working for this storage company, big quota, and I got recruited by this organization that was doing e-commerce, which was a big deal in 1998. And specifically, they were delivering e-commerce for software companies. So prior to 1998, if you bought software, believe it or not, you had to drive to a store or you'd buy it over the phone and somebody would mail you discs and then you would put the discs in your PC. Well, this company was really cool because they had a wrapper technology that you could buy the software on the internet and they would deliver it right then over the internet, which is exactly how we buy it today. But that was interesting. And this was '98 and the internet was a new thing and it was definitely a bubble. And so I jumped ship and went to help this e-commerce software company kind of get off the ground. And that was a lot of fun until 2000, when the whole internet bubble kind of burst. And we were a pre-IPO company. We filed our S1. Our roadshow, believe it or not, was planned for March of 2000, which happened to be the month that the bubble actually fell out of the internet boom.
I remember.
And so I found myself in a situation where all those options that were going to make me a gazillionaire were worth nothing. And I needed to figure out something to do. And so I kind of looked around the landscape and I saw this thing called, you know, search engines. And I really just believed that, man, these search engines are going to be really powerful in the world of B2B someday. Back in, you know, 2000, they really weren't a big deal for the B2B world, but all I knew, Brian, was B2B. I was a B2B sales guy. It was really the only thing that I knew. So I decided that I was going to start my own B2B search engine optimization company because it was something better to do than nothing, right? And, you know, necessity is the mother of invention. So my dad happened to have a data center outsourcing company at the time. He became my first client. And so we optimized his website. And then I got very fortunate to bring on a client that's a huge software company down in Houston. They became my second client and we were off to the races. It was really easy to get a client to rank very high in the search engines in 2000, believe it or not.
I remember.
Yeah. And so what happened though is shortly after that, we'd bring on clients and they were all B2Bs and we'd say, hey, look at these great rankings that we've got you in Yahoo, Alta Vista, and Lycos, right? Because Google wasn't around back then. And they would go, oh, that's awesome. You know, Paul, I really love that. But how are you helping me? You know, I'm not getting any leads. I see that I'm number one for this key phrase, but it's not turning into leads or anything that I can sell. And so we morphed into, you know, helping people get rankings to actually getting involved in, you know, what we call UX today, messaging and what do people see on your website. And we kind of had to because we were driving the visitors. They just weren't able to convert them with what they had on their website. Yeah. And that eventually just continued to grow. You know, Google happened and then pay-per-click, paid media happened. And so we just evolved as the industry evolved. And, you know, I didn't have salesman on my title anymore. I was president or CEO, but you never stop selling. I mean, that's one of the key points right. That, you know, we're always salesmen. In fact, the biggest sale I ever made, Brian, was in 2010 when I sold that agency to a bigger agency. You know, I made over $1 million personally making that transaction. And I wasn't a sales guy at all, but I certainly was selling that year as we were going through that process. So went to work for that company for 3 years as part of the deal, and then left and started Vindy in 2014. And You know, the world has changed a lot for B2Bs in the last 6 years. I'm really excited just to see, you know, some of the things that are going on, especially with sites like LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Brian, you've done such a fantastic job of building your brand and getting well known in LinkedIn. And quite frankly, you know, one thing that I wanted to be sure I shared today is, you know, everybody that's listening to this podcast has an opportunity to be you. I mean, we're all media companies,
but nobody
right?
wants to.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, what you're doing online, you've done a great job of really translating your skill set into something that is consumable in a way that people want to consume it. And that makes you a media company. You're the same as ABC, NBC, CBS, you pick the alphabet, right? But the point is, it's not just you, it's not just me, it's everybody listening to this podcast is their own media company. And it is super important for you to get out there and to share your subject matter expertise, be what I call a concierge. You know, just like we have concierge at hotels, you know, our job needs to be a concierge digitally, right? And concierge don't sell people anything. They actually help you have a great time, right? Hey,
Yeah.
where's the best Chinese restaurant? Well, it's
Right.
down the street. Where's my meeting? It's upstairs, right? Our job in digital as we build our brands is to be that concierge in the industry that we serve. Whatever that industry is, you know more about that industry than your customer does. Take that opportunity to be that concierge, which ultimately goes back to helping people.
It's a great analogy. Hey, Paul, this has been fun. Where can people go to learn more about you and your work?
You know, the best way to connect with me, Brian, would be on LinkedIn, just Paul Slack. Happy to connect with you there. And then if you want to check out my company, it's just vendidigital.com.